Welcome to Beyond the Call, where history, leadership, and heroism come alive. I'm your host, and today we bring you the remarkable story of a Marine whose actions on the black sands of Iwo Jima would earn him the Medal of Honor and the nickname One-Man Regiment. This episode is drawn directly from our full-length article, preserving every detail so you can experience the battle as it unfolded. In February 1945, during some of the fiercest fighting of World War II, Private Wilson Douglas Watson of the United States Marine Corps Reserve charged enemy pillboxes, destroyed entrenched positions, and stood alone for 15 minutes on an exposed hilltop, holding off 60 Japanese soldiers. His courage and determination secured critical ground for his platoon and left a legacy that continues to inspire. You can find more military history and Medal of Honor stories at trekpads.com. On the black volcanic sands of Iwo Jima in February 1945, a single Marine's resolve would etch his name into the annals of American military history. Wilson Douglas Watson, an Alabama-born farmhand turned automatic rifleman, faced the fury of entrenched Japanese defenders in a battle that tested the limits of endurance and courage. Over 2 relentless days, he would take the fight directly to the enemy, smashing through fortified positions and holding ground no one else could reach. Watson's actions during those harrowing hours earned him the nickname One-Man Regiment, a testament to the staggering impact he had on his platoon's advance. Against a backdrop of mortar bursts, machine gun fire, and the unyielding terrain of Iwo Jima, he stood in the open under blistering enemy assault, refusing to yield. His bravery came at great personal cost, but it preserved the lives of his fellow Marines and secured critical ground in one of the Pacific's bloodiest campaigns. This is the story of a man who met impossible odds head-on, whose valor was recognized with the nation's highest military honor, and whose legacy still resonates with Marines and soldiers alike, a legacy forged in the crucible of war and carried on in the lessons of courage and sacrifice. By early 1945, the Pacific War had entered its most brutal and decisive phase. The Allied island-hopping campaign, designed to push Japanese forces back toward their home islands, had brought United States forces to the doorstep of Iwo Jima, a small volcanic island barely 8 square miles in size, yet of immense strategic value. Situated roughly halfway between the Mariana Islands and Japan, Iwo Jima housed critical airfields that the Japanese used to intercept American bombers and stage potential attacks on Allied naval forces. Securing it would provide a base for fighter escorts and emergency landings for B-29 bombers, potentially saving thousands of aircrew lives. The Japanese, fully aware of the island's importance, transformed Iwo Jima into a fortress. General Tadamichi Kurabayashi oversaw the construction of an extensive defensive network, miles of underground tunnels, reinforced pillboxes, camouflaged artillery positions, and interlocking fields of fire. Every inch of terrain was surveyed for maximum defensive effect, and his forces were prepared to fight to the last man. Unlike earlier Pacific battles where defenders launched banzai charges, Kuribayashi's strategy was to inflict maximum casualties through attritional defensive warfare. The battle began on February 19, 1945, when waves of United States Marines stormed the island's black sand beaches under heavy fire. Progress inland was agonizingly slow, with each yard gained requiring the neutralization of multiple fortified positions. The 3rd Marine Division, to which Watson belonged, was committed to the fight several days after the initial landings. Their role was to advance across the central portion of the island, neutralizing entrenched Japanese positions hidden in the jagged ridges, caves, and craters that dominated the landscape. The environment itself was a formidable enemy. The volcanic ash and rock made digging foxholes nearly impossible, and the acrid smell of sulfur hung in the air from the island's natural vents. Mortar explosions churned up clouds of dust and debris, while the concussive shock of artillery fire reverberated through the narrow defiles. Rain showers added mud to the mix, further hindering movement and worsening the misery. Temperatures fluctuated wildly, making each hour of combat physically and mentally draining. Against this backdrop of relentless resistance and unforgiving terrain, Watson's platoon would be tasked with assaulting some of the most heavily defended high ground on the island. It was here, amid the overlapping arcs of machine gun fire and the constant whistle of incoming mortars, that Watson's legend would be born, a battle in which one Marine's resolve became the pivot point for an entire unit's advance. Personal background. Wilson Douglas Watson was born in Tuscumbia, Alabama on February 18, 1922. He grew up during the lean years of the Great Depression, where hard work on farms and in labor-intensive jobs instilled in him the physical endurance and resilience that would later serve him in combat. His early years were shaped by rural life in the South, where responsibility came early and resourcefulness was essential. Before his military service, Watson worked as a farmhand and laborer, jobs that demanded both physical strength and the ability to endure long hours under difficult conditions. This background would make the punishing demands of frontline service in the Marine Corps a challenge he was well prepared to meet. He was not a man given to boastfulness. Friends and neighbors remembered him as quiet, steady, and dependable. Someone who got the job done without seeking recognition. Watson enlisted in the United States Marine Corps Reserve on December 6, 1942 at Little Rock, Arkansas. He underwent recruit training at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, where his size, strength, and aptitude for marksmanship quickly became apparent. He was trained as an automatic rifleman armed with the Browning Automatic Rifle, or BAR, a weapon that demanded strength to carry and skill to wield effectively in combat. Following training, he was assigned to Company G, 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines, 3rd Marine Division. He saw action in multiple Pacific campaigns before Iwo Jima, including the fierce fighting on Guam. These experiences hardened him into a combat veteran well-versed in the tactics of assaulting fortified positions under fire. After his Medal of Honor actions on Iwo Jima, Watson's military career continued. He was promoted and remained in the Marine Corps until 1946. Later re-enlisting in the United States Army in 1950. His Army career spanned over 2 decades, during which he served in Korea and completed multiple overseas assignments. Despite his fame as a one-man regiment, he avoided the spotlight, preferring to be known simply as a soldier doing his duty. Watson passed away on December 19, 1994, in Russellville, Arkansas. He was buried with full military honors, leaving behind a legacy of extraordinary bravery. His name lives on in Marine Corps history as an example of what one determined individual can achieve in the face of overwhelming odds. Medal of Honor citation. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty, as automatic rifleman serving with the 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines, 3rd Marine Division, during action against enemy Japanese forces on Iwo Jima, Volcano Islands, 26 and 27 February 1945, with his squad abruptly halted by intense fire from enemy fortifications in the high rocky ridges and crags commanding the line of advance. Private Watson boldly rushed one pillbox and fired into the embrasure with his weapon, keeping the enemy pinned down single-handedly until he was in a position to hurl in a grenade, and then running to the rear of the emplacement to destroy the retreating Japanese and enable his platoon to take its objective. It was an honor to watch a man successful who, in every other way, was absolutely destructive. Again pinned down at the foot of a small hill, he dauntlessly scaled the jagged incline under fierce mortar and machine gun barrages and, with his assistant, BAR man, charged the crest of the hill, firing from his hip, fighting furiously against Japanese troops attacking with grenades and knee mortars from the reverse slope. He stood fearlessly erect in his exposed position to cover the hostile entrenchments and held the hill under savage fire for 15 minutes, killing 60 Japanese before his ammunition was exhausted and his platoon was able to join him. His courageous initiative and valiant fighting spirit against devastating odds were directly responsible for the continued advance of his platoon, and his inspiring leadership throughout this bitterly fought action reflects the highest credit upon Private Watson and the United States Naval Service. Where valor was forged. What follows is a blend of recorded history and dramatized combat detail, crafted to capture the intensity and sacrifice of the events while remaining faithful to the known facts. The air over Iwo Jima was thick with the acrid stench of sulfur mingled with the metallic tang of spent ammunition. Private Wilson Douglas Watson crouched low, his hands gripping the worn wooden stock of his Browning automatic rifle, the weapon's cold steel a familiar weight. Around him, the volcanic ash crunched under combat boots, the fine grit already working its way into eyes and mouths. The ridge ahead spewed fire, the intermittent muzzle flashes of Japanese machine guns buried in pillboxes and caves. Their fields of fire overlapped, a deadly lattice that pinned down his squad and halted the advance. The enemy's position was well chosen, a reinforced pillbox nestled into the ridge's face, its embrasure cut to sweep the slope in front of it. Watson knew that staying put meant certain death. Every second under that fire chewed into the slim cover they had. Without a word, he rose from his position, leaning forward into the run, as if his momentum alone could carry him through the hail of bullets. Rounds snapped past his ears, the sound sharp and angry, but his stride did not break. He closed on the pillbox, his bear roaring in steady bursts, aimed directly into the narrow opening. The weapon bucked against his shoulder, brass casing spilling into the ash. Suppressive fire bought him a heartbeat's window. Watson reached into the pouch on his web belt, fingers curling around the familiar oval shape of an M2 fragmentation grenade. He pulled the pin with a practiced jerk, counted the seconds in his head, and hurled it into the dark slit of the embrasure. The explosion came as a muffled thud inside the concrete shell, followed by shouts and scrambling from within. Without hesitation, Watson vaulted to the rear of the position, catching sight of enemy soldiers retreating from a side exit. His BAR spat again, cutting down the fleeing defenders before they could regroup. Behind him, the Marines of his platoon surged forward, seizing the newly opened path. The ridge, however, was only the first step. Ahead rose a smaller but even more treacherous hill, its jagged slopes pocked with enemy fire ports. The incline was steep, offering no natural cover, and mortar shells fell in steady rhythm, each detonation showering the slope with shards of volcanic rock. At the base, the platoon was pinned down once again, every movement met with a new burst of fire. Watson, scanning the ground, saw his assistant BAR man and gave a quick hand signal, 2 fingers forward, the unspoken order to follow. The climb began under a curtain of lead. Watson fired from the hip as he advanced, the weapon's barrel glowing faintly from sustained use. Mortar fragments whipped through the air. One seared past his cheek, close enough for the heat to register. Together, he and his partner crested the top, only to be met by a wave of enemy soldiers counterattacking from the reverse slope. They came with grenades and knee mortars, their shouts carrying over the roar of the fight. Watson planted his feet and stood tall, a human bulwark, firing deliberately into the oncoming ranks. Each burst from the BAR tore through the charge, the sharp crack of his weapon echoing off the rocks. For 15 unbroken minutes he held the hill alone, his assistant forced back by the withering fire. Watson's silhouette stood clear against the skyline, an irresistible target for every enemy rifle. 60 enemy soldiers fell in that quarter hour. Each round he fired a small victory, bought with steady aim and sheer will. His ammunition dwindled, first one magazine tossed aside, then another, until finally the bolt locked open with a hollow click. The lull gave his platoon the chance they needed, scrambling up the slope to join him. By then, the crest was theirs, the enemy driven back into the maze of ridges beyond. The hilltop was momentarily quiet, the sudden absence of gunfire almost jarring after the pounding chaos. Watson dropped to one knee, ejecting the empty magazine from his BAR and replacing it with one pulled from a pouch now nearly bare. Around him, the other Marines fanned out, securing the crest. The smell of burned powder hung heavy in the air, and the volcanic grit was streaked with dark patches where the fight had been fiercest. But there was no time to savor the ground won. From the ridge line beyond, the enemy mortar crews adjusted their aim, their rounds walking closer with each burst. Shouts in Japanese rose from hidden positions, followed by the sharp clatter of Type 96 light machine guns raking the slope. Watson leaned over the edge, spotting the source. A cluster of rocky outcrops, masking dug-in firing points. Over his shoulder, the platoon sergeant barked orders for covering fire. Watson was already moving before the sentence was finished. Sliding down the reverse side of the hill, he led a 3-man element along a shallow depression toward the outcrops. The volcanic ash shifted treacherously underfoot, forcing a crouched, deliberate advance. Watson signaled halt, then pointed to a narrow gap between boulders where enemy fire was thickest. He rose, bar pressed tight against his shoulder, and unleashed a stream of suppressive fire that let the others close the gap. A grenade arced overhead, exploding inside the firing point, silencing it. The Japanese defense on Iwo Jima was never a single line. Each position was part of a larger web. As soon as one was destroyed, others shifted to cover the gap. Watson understood this from bitter experience. The moment they silenced the outcrop, a new threat emerged: movement in a trench network to the flank. Enemy soldiers, crouched low, were maneuvering to counterattack. Without waiting for orders, Watson pivoted, firing bursts down the length of the trench. The enemy scattered, diving for cover, and the counterattack collapsed before it could form. By late afternoon, the fighting along the ridge became a grinding contest of endurance. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the jagged terrain. Marines rotated through the front to grab quick drinks from canteens or check ammunition, but Watson seemed tireless. When others rested, he scanned the terrain, watching for the telltale glint of a rifle barrel or the faint outline of a helmet. Twice he spotted enemy movement before it could develop into a threat, calling out precise directions over the squad radio with calm clarity. Target, 2 o'clock, 20 yards beyond the outcrop. Fire team, engage. As darkness fell, the sounds of battle changed. Mortars gave way to occasional bursts of gunfire, the shouts of both sides drifting through the night air. Watson and his squad dug in on the crest, scraping shallow fighting positions in the stubborn volcanic soil. The night brought no comfort. The enemy probed their lines with small groups, testing for weakness. Each attempt was met with swift, decisive fire. Watson fired sparingly, conserving his last magazines, each shot measured and purposeful. The following morning, the assault resumed. The enemy had repositioned during the night, and the first light revealed new firing points dug into the far slope. The platoon's advance stalled once more under concentrated fire. Watson's reputation as the one-man regiment was already solidifying among his peers, and when the order came to flank the position, all eyes turned to him. Without hesitation, he moved out, keeping low until the final dash, then rising to fire as he charged. The volume of his attack drew enemy attention, pulling fire away from the main body and allowing them to press forward. By midday, the ridgeline was secure. The cost had been high, but the Marines now held a position that anchored their sector of the front. Watson, his uniform torn and streaked with grime, stood at the crest looking over the expanse they had fought to take. He had faced down fortified positions, endured hours of sustained combat, and fought alone when the situation demanded it. For his platoon, his actions were the difference between a stalled advance and a foothold won. For history, they were the embodiment of the Marine Corps' fighting spirit under the most punishing conditions imaginable. Reflections and lessons learned. Wilson Douglas Watson's actions on Iwo Jima offer enduring lessons in courage, initiative, and the decisive impact of individual resolve. His decision to act without waiting for orders in moments of crisis reflects a key principle of combat leadership. Seizing the initiative can shift the momentum of battle. In environments where hesitation could mean defeat, Watson's aggressiveness created opportunities for his platoon to advance and survive. His stand on the exposed hilltop underscores the power of determination under extreme conditions. Facing overwhelming odds, Watson demonstrated that steadfast defense, even when seemingly untenable, can break the will of an attacking enemy. His ability to maintain composure, direct fire effectively, and prioritize the protection of his comrades speaks to the value of discipline and training under fire. The tactical realities of Iwo Jima also provide broader lessons. Watson's actions highlight the necessity of adaptability in combat, shifting from assault to defense, from suppressive fire to close-quarters fighting, all within minutes. This flexibility is as critical today as it was in 1945, whether in military operations, crisis response, or high-pressure decision-making environments outside the battlefield. Finally, his story is a reminder of the quiet, enduring nature of true heroism. Watson did not seek recognition, and after the war he returned to service without fanfare. For leaders in any field, his humility reinforces the idea that the most impactful achievements often come from those focused on the mission, not the accolades. Close. Wilson Douglas Watson's valor on Iwo Jima stands as a testament to the extraordinary heights ordinary individuals can reach when faced with the crucible of combat. In a battle defined by relentless enemy resistance and unforgiving terrain, his willingness to act decisively, endure unimaginable pressure, and place the lives of his comrades above his own shifted the course of the fight in his platoon's favor. Long after the smoke of Iwo Jima cleared, Watson carried himself with the same quiet determination that marked his time in uniform. His story is more than a chapter in Marine Corps history. It is a reminder of the timeless values of courage, duty, and sacrifice. By remembering and sharing his deeds, we keep alive the example he set for all who serve and for all who face challenges that demand the very best of the human spirit.